do the webinar on the implementation updates to the AF Gender Scorecard. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ishani Devnath. I am a readiness analyst with the Adaptation Fund Secretariat under the Countries and Partnerships Unit, which is led by Silvia Mancini. We are very pleased to have you join us for this very important webinar. To give you a little bit of the background, in March of 2016, the Adaptation Fund Board adopted the gender policy and the action plan, which with the aim to strive to uphold women's rights as universal human rights and to attain the goal of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls in all fund operations through a gender mainstreaming approach. Fast forward to March of 2021, the board then approved the gender policy and the gender action plan, where the policy aims to ensure that projects and programs supported by the fund provide equal opportunities for women and men, regardless of their background, age, race, ethnicity, religion, class, language, or ability, and as well as to measure the outcomes and impact of its activities on women and men's resilience to climate change impacts. And in compliance with the Gender Action Plan, the Gender Scorecard was developed to improve data collection and analysis for tracking the performance of projects in terms of gender mainstreaming activities at entry and during implementation and exit. So with this context, the aim of today's webinar is to delve into the key findings and results from the FY25 Gender Scorecard implementation, providing you with insights into the progress and the areas of improvement. This will also include tips and guidance on reporting gender in project performance report. And in addition to that, guidance on how to improve reporting abilities. We are today also very honored to have with us members from our NIEs from Kementerian Indonesia, as well as Profananpe Peru, as well as a member from one of our multilateral implementing entity, IFAD, to engage in an interactive panel session where they will share their experiences and practical knowledge on monitoring and reporting gender mainstreaming in adaptation fund projects and programs. So with that, some basic housekeeping rules. If you've just joined, please kindly mute yourself out of respect to all participants. If you have any questions or some clarification requests, please feel free to raise your hand or use the chat option. Someone from the Secretariat, from the gender team, will constantly be monitoring the chat to answer your questions. We do have a very interactive panel session as well as a Q&A discussion session where we will address all questions and clarifications. All the presentations that will be showcased today will be uploaded to our website and the notification will be communicated to you. And finally, the webinar today is going to be available in 3 languages, in English, French, and Spanish. You will see a small globe icon at the bottom of your WebEx page, and you can select the language of your choice between English, French, and Spanish. With that, let me first introduce you to our Gender Program Lead and Governance Specialist, Young Healy, who is going to take us through the first presentation. With that, Young, over to you.
Thank you, Ishani, for a great introduction. Welcome everyone again, joining from across the world. I'm so excited to engage more with you. We have very insightful agenda today, as introduced by Ishani. So without further ado, let's begin with the presentation on the Adaptation Fund Gender Scorecard Implementation FY25. So as many of you may not be familiar with the Adaptation Fund Gender Scorecard, so let me start with a brief explanation on what's the Adaptation Fund Gender Scorecard. The Fund Gender Scorecard was developed in 2023 as a tool for the Secretariat to track, monitor, and report the progress of the implementing entities' gender mainstreaming efforts in the Adaptation Fund projects at entry, during implementation, and exit. The development of the fund's gender scorecard has been a great milestone in enhancing our collective efforts, particularly in tracking the gender progress in the Adaptation Fund's portfolio and collecting quantitative and qualitative gender data in our projects. How it works? The fund's gender scorecard applies at 2 stages. First, for the gender scorecard for quality at entry, we collect and analyze quantitative and qualitative gender data from concept notes and full proposals submitted by our implementing entities. And 2, for the gender scorecard for quality during implementation and exit, we review the gender-related sections of the annual PPRs, midterm reports, and terminal evaluation reports submitted by implementing entities, and collect and analyze the qualitative and quantitative gender data. Next slide, please. So we have completed the pilot implementation of the gender scorecard for FY24, and the implementation report for FY24 was published early this year. And we started the second year implementation of the gender scorecard FY25 from July 1st, 2024, and ended on June 30, 2025. And FY25 gender scorecard implementation report will be soon published this month. Where the gender scorecard data come from? For quality at entry, we collect and analyze the concept note and full proposals at their first submissions to the Secretariat, so before they go into the Secretariat's technical review. And for quality during implementation, we examine projects' performance reports cleared by the Secretariat. Now, for data analysis, we use the mixed method approach. Our quantitative analysis involves calculating frequencies and percentages, which we visualize also using graphs to make the data easier to understand. For our qualitative analysis, we collect and then analyze the data thematically to identify important knowledge and lessons therefrom. This dual approach ensures we have a comprehensive understanding of the gender data that we have collected from the proposals and project reports submitted by our implementing entities. To dive into the results of the gender scorecard implementation FY25, let me invite my colleague Ronald to share insights with you. Ronald, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Yang, for that kind introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you are in the world. I'm really pleased to be here today to share the insights from our latest gender analysis under the Adaptation Fund Gender Scorecard. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to take you through some of the key findings from the Gender Scorecard implementation results. And as Yang has already mentioned, we have got 2 parts to the Gender Scorecard, the quality at entry and the quality during implementation. And in the first section, I'm going to be presenting and discussing the results from the quality at entry. If you can get to the next slide. So as Yang has mentioned, that we collected data from project proposal submissions that include concept note and full proposals. For FY25 gender scorecard, we had a total of 35 submissions, and among those 35 submissions, 63 were concept notes and 37% were full proposals, as you can see from the table displayed on the screen. And also some of the information in the table is also present the distribution of the concept note and full proposal submitted by implementing entity and also from the regions where these proposals and concept notes were coming from. And in the next slide, I want to go a little bit into the overviews of the findings. And the table here presents the overviews of the findings with respect to each indicator at qualitative entry. And we can see that 54%, which is more than half of the concept note, and all, which is 100% of full proposals, they included a gender analysis in the first submissions. And with respect to the full proposal submissions, 82% of them included gender responsive interventions, while 92% included gender responsive consultations. And the table can also show the other percentage distribution with the respective indicators at qualitative entry that also include gender action plan and gender responsive mechanisms. So what we are really seeing from these results is a demonstration among implementing entities on strong awareness of gender equality, especially at the stage of project design, which create a strong foundation for ensuring that project activities are more gender inclusive and equitable, because we have an impressive number of 83%, including gender analysis and assessment at full submissions. Next slide. So in the next slide, we want to discuss a little bit about the gender analysis within the concept note and the full proposals to look at the key indicators within the gender scorecard gender analysis. So to start with the concept note, the key concept note out of the 13 concept note that we have through gender analysis, 46% of them, they identified gender risks and impacts, as well as also identify equal participation and opportunities for women and men, while about 38.5% of them, they included gender statistics as well as describe gender relations context. But when we move to key components of gender assessment within full proposals, we had a total of 22 full proposals, and it was impressive to see that 96% of them, they identified gender-related risks and also identified equal participation and opportunities for women, and also described the gender relation context, while about 54% of them, they included gender-specific statistics. And also nearly 2/3, that's 60% of the full proposals that were submitted, they also considered intersectionality when conducting their gender assessment. So this shows that when we reach the point of full proposals, implementing entities are going an extra mile to try to put all the information that is relevant in terms of the risks that they anticipate during project implementation. Next slide. So since we had triangulated both quantitative and qualitative data, in this next slide, we are going to present the results that are linked to the qualitative information that you collected from the concept notes and the full proposals through the gender scorecard. So the first that you want to discuss are the gender-related risks and challenges. So through comprehensive gender analysis, the projects managed to identify key gender challenges. These include exclusion from decision-making and governance, so women remain underrepresented, especially in climate governance and local planning structures. For example, we find that in some areas, patriarchal norms and customary laws continue to limit women's agency and voice, both in community and household decisions. This was particularly relevant and particularly visible in areas where male continue to dominate key institutions, especially within the community and also on national level. And another risk that was identified by the proposals, gender analysis, was also women's limited access to resources and opportunities. Women continue to face systematic barriers, especially to land ownership, credit, agriculture input, and also training. For instance, some gender analysis, they found that gendered labor decisions continue to restrict women to unpaid and low value roles, especially those ones in agriculture. And also women continue to have limited access to technology, finance, and markets, which are all critical for them to be able to penetrate the value chains and get equitable benefits, especially within the context of agriculture. And also another impact that continued to emerge throughout the gender analysis was the disproportionate vulnerability to climate change, where women continue to bear disproportionate burdens during climate shocks due to their caregiving roles and their limited adaptive capacity. For example, some gender analysis show that in some areas, tidal floods and drought continue to increase women pressures, while in others, working in some contexts like unregulated recycling environments continue to pose risk to women and also continue to expose children to labor risk, because these are areas that are more risky when people are working in those areas. And another area that we looked at was the gender analysis. They were identify key opportunities and entry points for gender equality so that they can be able to design project activities that are gender inclusive. So the gender analysis, they really identified quite a number of opportunities for entry points to gender equality. And the first one was participation and leadership, where projects went an extra mile to establish minimum targets or quotas to ensure women's meaningful participation, especially in planning and implementation, and also in monitoring of the project activities. For instance, women were included in key decision-making bodies such as the village development committees and climate governance structures, with also gender sensitive facilitation and also the use of separate focus group discussion to ensure that they support inclusive consultation and also the participation of women. And also some projects, they also identified economic empowerment and enhanced livelihoods as another key entry point for ensure gender equality. For instance, grant schemes with quotas and top-up support were introduced for women applicants and women-led businesses. Women were supported in income-generating activities, especially within the areas of agriculture, ecotourism, fisheries, and also non-wood forest products. This helped women to diversify their livelihoods from those activities that are traditionally home-based to also more income generating livelihoods, thereby strengthening their economic resilience. And another area was capacity build and skill development, which was both among women and also within the project staff. So gender sensitive training was provided, especially in climate adaptation, sustainable agriculture, leadership, entrepreneurship, and also financial literacy. For instance, in some countries, climate schools and exchange visits were targeted at women and youth, while also technical teams within the project and also government staffs received gender-focused training to enable them to improve their institutional responsiveness. And another one was access to resources and services, where they ensure that women have got access to land, credit, technology, and markets. For example, gender responsive climate services and agriculture extension were introduced, and women were actively involved in resource planning and also planning process that also enabled them to have agents and also to be able to benefit from the resources that are emerging from the project activities. And to move on with our presentation and also discussing more on these qualitative findings that we find that during project development, proposal development processes, implementing entities are required to do stakeholder consultation, and 94% of all these submissions, they integrated gender responsive consultation into their design. This also including the participation of stakeholders within countries with a gender remit, and also providing sex disaggregated data showing the participant list, and also outlining specific arrangements to promote women participations. But what do these specific arrangements look like in practice? So we dived through the qualitative data to find what actually implementing entities were doing to put specific arrangement to ensure that women can adequately participate in these activities. So we found that they were focusing on creating safe and inclusive spaces for women voices. In several submissions, we find that separate focus group discussions were organized specifically for women and youth, and these provided safe spaces that allowed participants to be able to speak openly about their roles, needs, and vulnerabilities. This was very critical because it helped to surface the gender-specific issues like those ones linked to economic participation and also climate-related burdens. And also women were able to discuss issues related to gender-based violence because they feel safe with this separate consultation. And others focused on removing participation barriers. This was achieved through designing consultation in a way that ensured that we eliminate the barriers that disable women to be able to participate. So projects, they adapted the format, timing, and also location of meetings to accommodate women's domestic responsibilities and to some extent literacy levels. And some even went an extra mile to set participant targets, for instance, requiring at least 50% of women representation, and others, they use affirmative action to be able to promote women's leadership in decision-making roles. And also lastly, on women's participation, others, they took an intersectional approach to be able to include different women. So for instance, some projects, they ensure that the inclusion of indigenous women, the inclusion of women with disabilities and other marginalized groups, collaboration with institutions like ministries of gender and also some local NGOs help to provide institutional support that needed to sustain women participation. And now in terms of gender responsive interventions, the project, they really adopted some interventions to be able to respond to gender. This include also participation and leadership, where projects embedded gender sensitive governance structures to elevate women voices. Examples, they include core management plans that incorporate participatory mechanisms for women in natural resource governance, mandatory representation of women in community consultations. And others were focusing more on economic livelihoods, where they were supporting women economic agents while introducing quotas of up to 50% to provide skills to women. And other projects were proposing addressing gender norms and intersectionality, where they were aiming to tackling deeper social norms and structural barriers. And others were focusing more on capacity building and training, where they use initiatives like the Gender Action Learning System to promote shared decision making. And in the next session, I'm going to move on to present the findings from the quality implementation, where we collected data from the PPRs that were submitted by implementing entities in this reporting period. And as you can see, we received a total of 56 PPR, and among those 56 PPR, we had 7 indicators that we are looking at that are shown in the table that include the challenges and issues regarding gender equality, where 60% of the PPRs, they identify this, and also 87% of the PPRs, they also reported gender-related responsive interventions. And in the next slide, I'm going to take a deep dive into the qualitative findings that we found, especially related to the gender equality and women empowerment issues. First, in terms of gender norms and power dynamics, the PPRs reported that women continue to have limited agency and participation, especially in male-dominated structures. And in some cases, economic empowerment have also been linked to gender-based violence. But as a way of addressing some of these challenges, project responded with awareness campaigns, gender coaching, and social cycle support. And next, in terms of participation and leadership, women remain underrepresented in governance decision forums, and project improve inclusion by offering flexible scheduling, gender sensitive communication, and also partnering with local women organizations. And others also identified access to economic resources as a major issue, where women continue to face challenges that include insecure tenure and limited financial access. And implementing entities were promoting inclusive planning and also supporting women participating in alternative value chains that do not necessarily depend on land, and also encourage shared household decision making between couples so that they can be able to benefit from the resources. And also, as we mentioned before, training and capacity building has been also identified as an issue, where women continue to have low participation, and also there were institutional gaps So project responded by introducing gender quotas, literacy sensitive travel methods, and also targeting leadership developments, especially among women. And in the next slide, I'm going to discuss a little bit about the implementing arrangements that were put by implementing entities and executive entities to be able to comply with the adaptation gender policy. So from analyzing the qualitative information that we had, we found that there were key areas that implementing entities were focusing on to be able to ensure that they're complying with the adaptation gender scorecard. And one major issue, which was a recurring theme, was institutional arrangements and staffing. So projects strengthened internal structures by appointing gender specialists, focal points to guide implementation, monitor compliance, and also train staff. Some created dedicated gender units and worked towards gender balanced staffing and decision making. And some focused on policy and legal framework issues. So implementing entities aligned their arrangements with national gender policies and embedded gender considerations into institutional procedures. This included also developing gender policies, integrating gender criteria into beneficiary selection, and raising internal awareness to also support women participation. And we also found that gender action plans were increasingly used by implementing entities to comply with the adaptation fund gender policies. So most projects, they developed dedicated gender action plans that were tailored to local contexts. So others validated this through community engagement and embedding them into their operational tools that include manuals, monitoring frameworks, and work plans. And also some projects recruited, for instance, ESG experts to oversee the gender action plan implementation and ensure alignment with their gender policies. And others adopted inclusive and participatory approaches that include setting gender quotas, also forming women's groups, and also conducting gender balance consultation and running awareness campaigns to promote inclusions. These were mainly done to be able to target and also empower communities, especially women, to be able to participate within the project communities. And also capacity building and training was also another arrangement that was used by implementing entities to complying with the gender policies. So training was prioritized for staff, partners, and communities. For example, implementing entities providing trainings on gender responsive budgeting and also use participatory approaches like the gender action learning system, and also others adopted peer-led models to cascade gender knowledge across different communities within their implementing areas, that also including farming and lively groups. And lastly, monitoring, evaluation, and reporting using data system was also used as another arrangement to complying with the gender policy. So project institutionalized gender accountability by integrating sex and gender disaggregated indicators into their monitoring and evaluation systems. So this also including regular reporting cycles, gender audits, and training on gender data analysis to ensure continuous compliance with the adaptation gender policy. So what you can really see from this data and from these findings is that implementing entities put up these arrangements together, thereby demonstrating that they have a strong commitment to be able to comply with the adaptation gender policy during their project implementation. And in the next slide, I'm going to discuss also about the gender responsive interventions that we were implemented by implementing entities during the FY26. And gender responsive interventions are really central to achieving inclusive and sustainable climate adaptation. And more than 2/3 of the PPRs that we received, they reported completing such interventions during this reporting period. And the interventions, they were focusing around these 4 key areas. And the first area was to shift gender norms and power dynamics. So project work to raise awareness of gender roles and rights, and this was done through training, sensitization, and inclusive engagement. Activities under these interventions, they also include household visioning sessions that were aimed at promoting joint decision-making, targeted outreach to both women and men, and community dialogue on land rights and gender equality. For example, there was a project that championed household visioning within their communities, where sessions facilitated joint decision-making and gender role awareness within the families. And another key area that interventions were trying to target was on participation and leadership, where many projects actively promoted women's involvement in leadership and decision making. This also included equal representation in community committees and support for women and youth as change agents in climate adaptation projects. This also includes creating platforms to amplify women's voices in climate finance. For example, there was a project that reported that women leadership was promoted, especially within the area of planning, water, infrastructures, and also where a target in that project of 50% was reserved for women's participation. So such kind of interventions also ensure that women's priorities were able to shape the participation and also the project outcomes. And also other interventions that we found out were aimed at targeting access to economic or even productive resources, especially among women. So projects were aimed at addressing the barriers of women access to land, finance, and also livelihood opportunities. So in this case, interventions including prioritize women-led households in terms of project participation, and also providing women with startup grants, also integrating women into market systems, and offering stipends linked to participation, especially in climate resilient activities. For example, there was a project that supported women-led households in providing climate resilience, housing, and also livelihood support. And lastly, other interventions were targeting also training and capacity buildings. This was training also among women and also training among project staffs. So these projects, they delivered gender responsive training in technical skills, leadership, and also climate planning. So women were trained in areas that include eco entrepreneurship, climate smart agriculture, infrastructure development, and also adaptation planning. For example, in one project, 70% of engineers that were trained were women, and also it ended up supporting women to be involved in climate resilient water infrastructure. In all doing this, the projects, they were ensuring that they were using inclusive methods that include literate sensitive tools and also gender modules in formal education that also help to ensure long-term impact. So in the next slide, I'm going to discuss about the several key lessons that also emerge from the analysis of the data and also key issues that were reported by implementing entities during project implementation. So from the analysis, several key lessons emerge on advancing gender equality in the climate adaptation projects. And the first key lesson was on the impact of inclusive participation, where projects that actively engage women in consultation, decision-making, and implementation reported more accurate targeting, deeper understanding of community needs, and more sustainable outcomes. For instance, women-only consultations helped to surface critical insights and empowered women to take on leadership roles, especially in areas that are linked to climate resilience building. And secondly, gender intervention equality were most effective where both men and women were engaged equally. So this involved encouraging shared responsibility, such as joint decision-making and inclusive planning, which led to strong household and community level resilience. Also increased women participation in activities like warning systems and reconstruction efforts were linked to more effective disaster and responsive. And also thirdly, linking economic empowerment to gender equality proved essential for some of these projects. For example, projects that supported women access to productive resources that include land, grants, and training, so improves the participation and outcomes. This also includes tailoring income generating activities to align with women traditional roles, such as home-based work or instances in area like agriculture. This also helped in significantly increasing women's engagement and benefits. And finally, we learned that institutional capacity is a critical enabler for gender equality, where strong partnership and gender responsive structures, especially between implementing entities, local community organizations, and also the governments, and also targeted training, they also help to embed gender equality into local governments, and also using gender disaggregated data for monitoring and evaluation also enabled better tracking and decision making throughout the project trials. So in the next slide, in a nutshell, from the FY26 Gender Scorecard report, we found that there is strong progress in gender mainstreaming across the Adaptation Fund portfolio, because we observed that many projects they were implementing all these implementing arrangement, gender responsive interventions, although key barriers remain that are linked to social norms and limited capacity and risks that include gender-based violence. Implementing entities are implementing gender responsive interventions to be able to respond to some of these challenges. So this brings me to the end of my presentation, and I would like to thank you all for your attention. And I hope that these findings will be able to spark more dialogue and action towards advancing gender equality. So I will now hand back the floor back to Yang. Thank you again for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ronald, for the very interactive presentation. It was a very detailed and informative presentation for sure. And before we move on to the next segment on reporting, I would like to open this floor for any burning and urgent questions or clarifications you may have for Ronald or Young or Graciela based on the presentation you just heard. And when you do ask a question, please do introduce yourself, your name, where you're from, your organization and country. So we at the Secretariat are also familiarize ourselves with you. And please also use the chat option to ask your questions. So do we have any questions for Ronald? I see no hands raised so far, so I take it that was an extremely clear presentation. And everyone had a very good understanding of what Ronald said.
Raise a hand.
All right, Kado from FIRCA, please go ahead. The floor is yours. You can unmute yourself.
Alors, bonjour à tous et à toutes. J'espère que vous m'entendez. C'est Fidèle Kouadio de la Côte d'Ivoire. Bonsoir Ishani. Et merci aux présentateurs tels que déroulés. Ma question s'adresse aux responsables du fonds d'adaptation. Et je pense que c'est une requête qu'on pose chaque fois qu'on a des réunions avec le fonds d'adaptation. Donc, les éléments tels que présentés par celui qui vient de finir sa présentation sont assez clairs pour nous, entités, je veux dire, de mise en œuvre des projets. Cependant, le souci qu'on commence à avoir de plus en plus, c'est dans la préparation des projets et non dans l'exécution des projets. Comme vous le savez, la préparation des projets, il y a deux phases. La phase de note conceptuelle et la phase de la full proposal. Donc aujourd'hui, il y a des éléments qu'on demande aux entités dans la phase de la note conceptuelle qui nécessitent un travail fourni pour pouvoir avoir les données dont on parle souvent lorsqu'on arrive à la mise en œuvre. Et cela nécessite des coûts supplémentaires. Déjà, merci parce que le fonds a déjà fait beaucoup d'efforts sur l'augmentation des dotations pour les fonds de préparation de projet. Mais il faut dire qu'à ce stade de note conceptuelle, les éléments qui sont demandés aujourd'hui sont assez nombreux et les budgets qui sont alloués à la phase de préparation souvent ne permettent pas d'aller au-delà de ce que certaines entités peuvent le faire. Nous, on a déjà fait l'expérience sur 2 projets et on a vu que véritablement, on était limité en matière de ressources financières. Cependant, ce qu'il dit, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, est très pertinent. Donc, la question maintenant, c'est de voir entre les entités accréditées et le fonds d'adaptation, comment on essaie de se comprendre pour qu'aux différents stades, ces entités-là puissent avoir effectivement les moyens d'intégrer tous ces éléments-là dans les phases de préparation du projet, de sorte que dans la mise en œuvre, on soit plus à l'aise à dérouler tous ces outils et tous ces éléments que vous venez de partager. Donc, c'est beaucoup plus une contribution qu'une question. Mais voilà l'élément que je voulais apporter par rapport à la présentation qui vient d'être faite. Voilà. Merci.
Thank you so much, Fidel, for that contribution and the question. I'm wondering, Young, if you would like to give a quick feedback, or Ronald or Graciela, to that before we move to the next section.
Thank you, Ishani, and thank you for a great question. So perhaps maybe this is a point for clarification. As Ronald also mentioned, the gender scorecard applied to the first submission of the concept note, and it is not necessary. It doesn't necessarily mean that these indicators are the gender requirements at the concept note. As you may know, we at the concept note stage, that the gender analysis, for example, we don't expect it to be, you know, the full scale and as comprehensive as the gender assessment required for, you know, full proposal. However, we have noticed that several concept notes already included a gender mainstreaming initiatives there, and that's how we collect it and we analyze it. Hope that clarifies. And we have later on the Q&A session, so we can engage further on that aspect if it is not clear. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Young. With that, and in the interest of time, let's move on to the very next section, which is on the reporting and annual project performance report. And over to you, Young and Graciela.
Thank you, Shani. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Graciela Ijar, and I'm a gender consultant at the Adaptation Fund, and I will be delivering this presentation. Next slide, please. So this presentation will be divided into 5 areas. First, why gender reporting is important to the Adaptation Fund, where to report gender data in the PPR, how to report gender data, what are some areas for potential improvement in gender reporting, and some examples that we also identified. Next slide, please. So regarding the first topic, why gender reporting matters, as you know, and this has been also explained, this is a requirement from the Adaptation Fund gender policy, as it ensures alignment with our corporate mandate and policies, but it also ensures a gender responsive design and implementation of the projects. It also allows us to identify and mitigate gender-related risks, also integrate gender and improve the outcome of the project, also capture lessons learned and enhance our interventions, and also it promotes accountability and transparency for the fund. Next slide, please. Okay, so where to report gender in the PPR? So as it is stated also here, gender should be reported throughout the PPR, but there are specific sections where you can provide this information. So one of the main sections is the gender policy compliance, which includes 4 subsections: quality at entry, quality during implementation, implementation arrangements, and grievances. Additionally, we have the environmental and social policy compliance section, and also the lessons learned section. It's important to note that when we are reporting gender data, we have to take into consideration an intersectional approach that is not only focusing on how many women are being benefited from the project, but also how many young women, how many indigenous women, how many pregnant women. Also bear in mind the implementation arrangements, and also link the project outcomes, link the progress on gender to project outcomes and impact indicators. Also ensure that there are gender responsive actions being developed, explaining these gender responsive actions, identify what challenges have been encountered and what measures have been taken to address these challenges, what risks and what factors have enabled the support, have supported gender integration, what factors have hindered gender integration. That is, we know that the PPR has a particular template, but we want you to have these questions in mind, these factors in mind, so that you provide us with additional information that then we can record in the gender scorecard and also share with our partners. Next slide, please. So we have some guiding questions to support our implementing entities when filling the PPR. So for the gender policy compliance section, we have these 4 columns with the 4 subsections, and there are some guiding questions that we came up. I'm not going to read them all because it would take too long, but some questions, for example, are if the gender assessment consider intersectionality, if the indicators are gender disaggregated, for quality during implementation, what challenges hinder the compliance of the gender policy, what actions have been taken to address these issues, how is progress being monitored and reported, is there a gender action plan, for implementation arrangements, what gender responsive interventions have been implemented, what capacity gaps have affected the compliance with the policy. And for the grievances, if there are grievances related to gender equality that have been reported, how they have been resolved, and if they were lessons learned identified and documented from these processes. Next slide, please. So this is the environmental and social policy compliance. So for example, when assessing the risk related to gender, what gender-related risks were identified? Have gender-related risks been raised as an issue during consultations with stakeholders? What mitigation and safeguards will be taken? And how will be the monitoring of this risk? How will it take place? For the USP section, for example, if women were consulted during USP assessments, if gender disaggregated data was used in the risk assessment, and for the lessons learned section, if there have been lessons learned regarding gender mainstreaming, if the lessons learned have been recorded and shared with stakeholders, and if the lessons learned include gender and intersectional data. So next slide, please. So like we mentioned previously, we have identified good practices in gender reporting in our PPRs. That was also reported in the gender scorecard. So some of the good practices that we were able to identify are related to reporting sex disaggregated data, not general numbers, specifically mentioning the total number of beneficiaries and also the percentage of women. Ideally also included intersectional perspectives such as 52% of women, 30% of young people, and so forth. Also tracking the participation and benefits received by gender. Showing how men and women participate and benefit from the project. For example, 70% of livelihood trainees were women, 60% of women received startup kits. Also linking the project activities to gender outcomes, explaining how interventions address gender-specific needs. For example, improving water access to reduce time burden for women, as we know that women play a role in water collection in some communities. Also using quantitative and qualitative data. This is important to also combine, but also complement the statistics with the stories. We want to know how many women participate in the activities, but also if perceptions were changed, if social norms were addressed, if gender gaps are being reduced. Also highlighting gender transformative actions. We know that the policy specifies gender responsive interventions, but the aim is, of course, always go higher if possible and promote gender transformative actions, such as these gender action learning system workshops that help both women and men jointly design adaptation strategies, and also encourage shifting gender norms and roles within the communities and also in institutional frameworks. Of course, applying an intersectional lens. We know that women are not a homogeneous group, and between women, there are different groups that face different challenges. So it's important to also focus on the different subgroups of women and also marginalized communities, whether they are young women, older women, migrant women, indigenous women, and how projects are also adopting interventions aiming at improving and foster their empowerment as well. Next slide, please. So some of the approaches that we are supporting to improve the quality of the gender reporting are, for example, when it comes to lack of disaggregated data, specify the number of people. Some of the examples from the PPR that we encountered was no mention of a specific number of men beneficiaries or women beneficiaries, but just a general number. Also generic reporting. So for example, stating that gender equality was considered across all project activities, but not specifying how was the gender approach integrated, what activities or how activities have integrate gender or mainstream this gender approach. Also ignoring intersectionality, again, mentioning a general number without providing additional details. Insufficient details, so women participated in consultations, but also not specifying if how many women, what type of women, if NGOs, if individual women, if young women or something similar. Overlooking barriers, so just stating a number of how many women participated in a certain activity, but no further analysis or additional information that can allow us to know if this number is beyond the target, exceeded the target, or is below the target. So in order to have a comparison, okay, is the project doing well or not? Does it need additional support when it comes to gender? And another aspect that we have been able to identify is the lack of qualitative insight. So again, just mentioning numbers without explaining, the effect or the narrative or the context. That's the stories of the participants, some quotes and some feedback. Next slide, please. So here we have some examples of the PPR and how can we improve the reporting. So, for example, the PPR could mention community consultations were held, and we have put an example. For example, 107 consultations were held with 1,600 participants, being 80% of them women. Women prioritized these issues such as safety. Another example would be instead of 6,500 people receive livelihood support, specify that from this number, 60% were women, that women dominated poultry by 85% and handicrafts 70%, whereas men dominated fishing by 90%. Instead, again, of farmers trained in climate resilient practices, we could mention the number of women, 60%, and also that the women's adoption rates were 20% higher due to female-led follow-ups. Again, instead of CPP volunteers training, the number, and also an additional example of how women now lead 5 of 12 early warning teams. Regarding risk, for example, we noticed that projects mentioned that there is no risk identified at the beginning related to gender equality. We could mention that baseline showed women lacked land access and decision-making power, and that the project targeted 50% of female inclusion in the project. Instead of saying vulnerable groups were included, actually mentioning what sort of subgroups were included to reflect this intersectional approach. And instead of gender considerations were important, mentioning, flexible training, what sort of arrangements that promote gender equality were adopted in the project, such as flexible training times, online activities, or activities that provide daycare for women due to their caregiver role. So just providing additional information, quality information, qualitative information that we can then share with our partners and also include it in our reports that provides additional information to know how projects are integrating gender. And if there are some challenges, also mentioning the challenges so we can provide additional support. Next slide, please. So that's my presentation, and I go back to Young. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Graciela. So given the interest of time, let's dive into the panel discussions. Today, we have the representatives from 3 of our esteemed implementing entity, Claudia Godfrey, Director of Innovation and Strategic Management from Profonampe, and Eka Melis, Director of Environment and Sustainable Governance, Kemitron of Indonesia, and Juan Carlos Mendoza, Director of Environment, Climate, Gender, and Social Inclusion Division of IFAD. So as a housekeeping guideline, given the interest of time, I'd like to kindly suggest each panelist to keep their interventions to 3 minutes per question. So let's begin with a question for all of our panelists. To start, I'd like to ask each of you what observations or insights from the FY25 Adaptation Fund Gender Scorecard implementation stood out to you, and how do they relate to your team's experiences or expectations? So let's start with Eka from Kemitron, followed by Claudia from Proponampe, and then Juan from IFAD. Floor is yours. Eka.
Yeah. Hi, Young. Thank you for the opportunity to share our thought. One of the insights that stood out for us is that not many implementing entity actually could provide specific and detailed informations on their gender responsive approach. We can see this during the concept notes, but also on the reports. I think this is likely perhaps due to not many implementing entity having a pre-existing mechanisms, established capacities, and extensive resource and knowledge in this area. For example, during concept development, sometimes difficult to reach gender balanced participations due to social and cultural barriers. And most likely it is happening a lot in our cases because some of our executing entity partners mostly coming from small and local CSO. Such observations is also aligned with what Kemitraan on the ground experiences and several challenges and opportunities that we see. The first one is on the institutional arrangement and staffing. The report, the GSC report emphasized the need for gender balanced team with sufficient knowledge on gender issues. Kemitraan has seen this, has experienced this, and has also addressed this by deploying a gender specialist in the middle of the project implementations to assist with implementation and to ensure that we engage women and youth group in the projects. These actions directly reflect the needs for dedicated expertise. The second challenge is that I see the report also points to the needs to invest in capacity building at both the institutional and community levels to underscore the significance of gender equality. Our experience in two projects that we have in Sadang and Pekalongan support these observations. As we conducted socialization events and training sessions to increase the knowledge and commitment of the local official and also community activists regarding the understanding of gender equality and climate change and how these two interact. The other things that also come to our mind is that the report inside saying that promoting gender equality does takes considerable time and iterative effort that for us it's consistent with our experience. We have processes that involve addressing deep-seated social norms that can limit women's participation in decision-making and public forums. But we leverage that challenge as an opportunity to empower women economically through initiatives such as aquaculture, mangrove processing, coffee processing. This has elevated the women's role and made them significant contributors to the local community economy. In summary, we see that the report's finding resonate with our practical experience, highlighting the shared challenge of building gender-specific capacities and the nature of mainstreaming gender equality. The report does provide a macro level perspective that validates our micro level efforts and challenges we encountered in our projects. Back to you, Yang. Thank you.
Thank you, Eka, for candid and insightful experiences and lessons learned to share. So I'd like to turn to Claudia.
Thank
Claudia,
you, Yang.
floor is yours.
Thank you, Yang. I'm happy to be in this important webinar, and thank you very much for the invitation. From our point of view, this scorecard is very valuable. It gives us this common way to measure gender integration in all the stages of the cycle of a project, since the design to the implementation and monitoring and learning, and how can we build our own structures to develop depending each reality in our countries. What we want to highlight first is that there is a strong progress, and we are happy to know about the good practices that other organizations, other NIEs, implementing entities are implementing in the field. And from our point of view, of course, measure in the better way is always important. I so reflected myself making efforts to develop the suitable indicator that will be feasible to measure with budget, but with the budget that we have. But in some cases, we just need to be maybe creative and have some kind of innovation from our design processes. At Profunampe, we see the same. We see reflected in this report, and comparing with the previous report from 2023-24, we see that, for example, the development of concept notes at the very first stage has some lack of information talking about gender, and it's in our case is because we do not have information, or maybe the best information to start this development process of a concept note. In the relation that we had already developed, for example, with indigenous peoples, we are working with women leaders to support us to gather the best information for us to develop together a concept note. But at the very first stage, when we are developing the idea and the concept note, in some cases, we need to measure, not to measure, but we need to keep this sense of incentives to women leaders to be part of our strategies. The second thing that I want to mention is that we need to integrate simple tools into project monitoring. And what the last presentation showed us is that there are very nice questions that we can use, and it could be the way to support the implementation team to work with this way of reporting without feel them burden. What I want to try to focus is that in some cases we need the people that are in the design are not then the same that are going to implement the project. So we need to think in both sides to have this appropriation and proper articulation with the local population. And also we need to, I want to say this because it's really important, we need to think about building an institutional culture inside our organizations. It's not just a project. Our policies are not just policies for the projects, are policies for our institutions. So in our case, in Profunampe, we are reviewing all our policies regarding not just gender, but all safeguards to start introducing in all our actions and processes gender balance. Back to you, Yang. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia, for sharing the important perspectives and your highlighting the importance of institutional culture, and that I'm sure that resonates with many of us here. So I'd like to turn to Juan. Juan, floor is yours.
Very much. And first, I'd like to start by really congratulating the Adaptation Fund for this scorecard. And I think there are many things that resonate with us. I mean, we have been in a journey precisely on issues of intersectionality. We moved away from simply indicators of outreach and quotas to looking at intersectionality issues. So we report, for example, the impact of a project when it comes to women who are indigenous people, who have disabilities, who are within the different target groups that we have. But one thing that is very important, and I think it was mentioned, is that as you move away from outreach numbers, measurement does become more complex because you are trying to achieve a more meaningful impact. In IFA, we have 3 strategic objectives on our gender policy. The first one, which probably you would expect in an international financial institution, is to promote economic empowerment of women. And this is one area where traditionally outreach indicators may were in principle sufficient. But the other 2 components of our strategic objective is, the first one is increase women's decision-making power and representation in rural institutions. And the other one is more equitable balance in workload and benefits. And I think this is where all of us as implementing entities, we need to make quite a bit of investment and also work a lot in the case of IFA with the countries we work with, because measuring this, designing interventions that address all 3 of these strategic objectives is not easy. Through our projects, we have different mechanisms, including the GALS approach, and I can talk a little bit more about that later, but that get involved at the household level with both men and women to look at issues of power dynamics within the household, workload, and as we always say to our colleagues when we look at economic empowerment, we cannot expect that women will have for example, the double burden of both becoming entrepreneurs, for example, which we want to support, when at the same time they still need to manage the household, which is what we really see in most of the communities where we work. So again, I think what we hear from the Adaptation Fund is very much aligned with the work that we're doing. It's complex work. We're also we're also working at the intersection of gender issues and adaptation. We're implementing a program on gender transformative mechanism in the context of climate adaptation. And we look forward also to sharing with all of you some of the emerging lessons we're having from these experiences. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juan, for sharing IFA's perspectives on the gender scorecard. And I'm very glad that the IFA's strategic goals and objectives are aligned with what we are really trying to achieve in terms of gender mainstreaming. So actually, I do have another question for our panelists. But given the interest of time, to secure some time for our audience for Q&A, maybe we could move on to the Q&A session. So let me turn to Ishani for Q&A session. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Yang. So the floor is open to all participants. If you have any questions for the Secretariat as well as the panel members regarding their own experience in the implementation, please feel free to raise your hand or paste your question in the chat. We will give it maybe a minute more. And if you have no questions, perhaps we can move to the second question for the panel members, because I think participants are very interested in
We
hearing
have
their
hands up.
experience. And I see Sierra Daniels from UNDP. Your hand is up. So over to you.
Hi, I hope you can hear me okay.
We can. Thank you, Sierra. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. It's Kira Daniels from UNDP, and I want to thank you for this really informative session and for the gender scorecard itself, because I think that kind of accountability is really key. It's for countries, for entities like UNDP to know that you're looking at this. And thank you for your leadership, especially around intersectionality. We don't get to talk about that enough, I think, in the gender environment world, and it's great to see. So a lot of the findings really echoed with me, including around the difficulty in sex disaggregated data collection, in getting the kind of comprehensive gender analysis done during the project preparation phase. I think one of the countries was discussing that. And that first year of project implementation is really important in that, because only so much can be done at the beginning. But I wanted to see if there are any reflections on something that was touched on in the findings, but that I think about a lot, and which is we have strong gender development results reported throughout the scorecard, which are really key. But I think a lot of those gender equality results are also improving the climate adaptation, resilience, and environment outcomes. And the more we can think about including gender equality as part of the strategic objective of adaptation projects, that to achieve those adaptation results, you need to think about gender equality. And maybe I'm just reframing some of what you're already saying, but I just wondered if there were any reflections on that and specific areas to point to, and perhaps something to think about in the framing of the future scorecard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kiara. I'm wondering, Young, if we should take a few more questions, if that's
Yes,
okay.
let's do that. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions for the Secretariat as well as the panel members? I did see a few hands raised before, but they have been taken down. I'm wondering if all the questions have been answered or... All right, Young, over to you then. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ishani, and nice to see you, Kiara. And thanks for the great question and also some suggestions, and I fully agree with you. In the Adaptation Fund, for example, the gender mainstreaming doesn't stand, as its own component apart from the adaptation project's goals. It should be integrated into all the aspects of the project. So we are fully aligned with what you are thinking. However, we also, this is the second year of the gender scorecard implementation, and the successful implementation of the gender scorecard depends on the quality of data and information, submitted by our implementing entities. Somehow, so unless that the alignment beyond the, let's say, the sex desegregated data on participants and beneficiaries, as also Juan mentioned, mentioned before during his intervention, that we are keen to seeing the results on the deeper impacts of the gender mainstreaming in the Adaptation Fund projects, how it eventually affected or contributed to the outcome and impact of the whole project itself. So we are also learning by doing, implementing the gender scorecard. We see also a lot of areas for improvement, not just about the implementing entity side, but also, our side as well. So, we are taking stock of the lessons learned from the implementation of the gender scorecard, not just looking into the gender mainstreaming aspects, but how it has been integrated into the, from our end to the project level as well. So we are sharing the same direction, actually, and hopefully we are able to link more holistically to the eventual outcome and impact of the adaptation project itself. So I guess today we have shared a lot of information, and therefore that I'm sure that the audience is digesting, many lessons learned and information and also insights from our distinguished speakers from the panel discussions as well. So what I wanted to say is that this is not the only chance to share your, experiences and insights and any questions. So, we will have another session and we hope to further engage with you. So now as we bring this webinar to a close, perhaps I wanted to share a reflection on the connection between the fund's gender scorecard and implementing entities' gender reporting. What we learned is that data is crucial and effective storytelling can be even more powerful. And the successful implementation of fund's gender scorecard depends on the quality of data and also information submitted by our implementing entities through funding proposals and project reports. Therefore, we can't overstate the importance of the implementing entities' roles and contribution to the successful implementation of the gender scorecard. So we would like to encourage you to share not only your successful gender mainstreaming initiatives and experiences, but also the challenges and barriers you have encountered in your gender mainstreaming initiatives as well. And this will enable us to more effectively identify and also tailor adaptation fund support for our implementing entities. But also, I'm sure this could help mobilize our stakeholders to coordinate collective efforts to advance gender equality goals across the country and continent. So before we conclude, I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to all our speakers and to everyone who joined us today. I must also extend a special thanks to the dedicated Adaptation Fund colleagues, Ishani and Jin Young, behind the scenes who made this webinar possible. I'd like to also want to express our sincere gratitude to our interpreters who have ensured our important discussions and conversations is accessible across the languages. So last but not least, I would also like to thank our audience for your active engagement and thoughtful attention as well. So we look forward to continuing this important work together. And thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Young. And thank you again to all the participants. And the conversation keeps moving. It doesn't stop here. We will very shortly send you a notification of once all the presentations have been uploaded to the website. And once again, this is one of the webinar among the many webinar series of the Readiness Program of the Adaptation Fund. So please, we encourage you to reach out to us to express your interest in the topics you would like to discuss for our webinars and seminars so we can cater it to your needs and as well as your challenges to effectively deliver accordingly. And lastly, the Adaptation Fund will be present at the Africa Climate Summit next week in Ethiopia. So we look forward to seeing as many of you as possible to keep the conversation moving. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening once again to all. Stay safe. Bye.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you.